Women have been going missing and have been murdered in Juarez as a crisis since the 90s. But seeking out young pregnant women who come from poor families and poor neighborhoods where no one is going to look for them, to have their babies taken from them and then sold to an American buyer on the other side of the border. This is absolutely devastating, no matter how you put it. I have some really devastating, exclusive, unreported news coming out of Juarez, Mexico. This is an incredibly tragic story. I don't think in my years of reporting I've ever come across some information that is so ugly, and we haven't seen any coverage of it in the news. Young, pregnant women from low socioeconomic backgrounds in Juarez are being kidnapped, mutilated for their baby to be taken out of their bodies, and their babies are then being sold to Americans in El Paso. Then these women are being left for dead. I received a confidential tip from Mexican law enforcement stating that for the past couple of months, this has been something that they've flagged. Multiple women, pregnant women in their early 20s and late teens have gone missing. And just recently, some photos were found of the victims of this, of women who were left, their bodies dumped completely naked and absolutely mutilated in alleyways throughout Juarez. And their bodies visibly had gone through a pregnancy, but the babies were not in or near their bodies. I have a really hard time telling you guys this story because I don't think I've heard of something so heinous in my time as a journalist, nor have I ever received a piece of information that is so tragic that no one else is talking about, that people don't know about. The sources that I have spoken to believe that CJNG, the Jalisco New Generation Cartel, is heading this operation. And I have to say that this is an entirely new low. Women have been going missing and have been murdered in Juarez as a crisis since the 90s. But seeking out young pregnant women who come from poor families and poor neighborhoods where no one is going to look for them, to have their babies taken from them and then sold to an American buyer on the other side of the border. This is absolutely devastating, no matter how you put it. The images are extremely gruesome, and unlike anything I've seen before, I mean, as most of you likely know, we see a lot of videos and images of extremely violent crimes, but behind the screen, these were living people. And in this case, it's very young, vulnerable women whose babies, fetuses, are being ripped out of their bodies and sold to Americans. Unfortunately, there is some information that I just cannot share about this because obviously this investigation is going on. This is something that was flagged only recently over the course of a few months. Of course, like I said, this isn't a new problem. Unfortunately, because these are young women from poor backgrounds whose bodies are being disposed in complete inhumane ways, and they're not some famous blonde girl who is shot on TikTok Live, the idea that we're going to see justice or proper media coverage here is highly unlikely. So I started digging into what could possibly be cases of this that we've seen publicly. About a month ago, a woman who was pregnant was found in a clandestine grave in Juárez. Leslie Godinez Carrillo, she's 20 years old and she was from León, Guanajuato. She was found dead at a home in the Portal del Roble neighborhood. She was reported missing on July 17th. She was pregnant, and so far, although the timeline of this horrible operation extends over the course of a few months until now, this is one of the only cases I found where the female victim was pregnant. In July, a 17-year-old girl from Hobbs, New Mexico, was also found in a clandestine grave. That did make headlines. She was from the U.S. She was found in the same area of the city, but not in the same neighborhood. Although this neighborhood is very prominent when it comes to crime and homicides, and it doesn't appear that this 17-year-old girl was pregnant. The reason I'm listing off these cases is because typically what we've seen in terms of female homicides spanning over the course of decades, there may be some connection amongst the victims, these women, but nobody is connecting those dots because, like I said, the likelihood of this demographic of victims to ever receive justice is highly unlikely. These stories absolutely eat me up. Officially, 20 women were killed in July in Juárez, but going through the list of those victims, it looks as though most of them were victims of domestic violence or sicario hits. They either were taken out by a hitman, they had some sort of cartel ties perhaps. 3 of these cases, of these 20, though, did seem very odd to me. Those 2 that I mentioned, but also a victim who goes by Iracim E.R., Iracim E.R. She's 33 years old. She was killed by strangulation, and 3 men were arrested in the case. Another 2 victims were also not identified, and the circumstances of these murders haven't been disclosed. Another one of these cases was a very young woman who was found murdered, and based on the details of what's available to me, what I could access, there seems to be some speculation that she was pregnant, but that is unclear. Of course, what we do know is this is happening, and whether these women are being disposed of publicly or being buried in clandestine graves will change the narrative as to whether or not anyone views this as a problem. As a journalist, one of the biggest challenges I face is cutting through all the noise and bias to find out what really happened. Too often, the same story is reported in completely different ways depending on the outlet and the agenda behind it. That's why for today's episode, I partnered with Ground News. It's one of the best tools to cut through all the noise and find out what's really happening. Check out this article that I found. You can immediately see which outlets picked it up, how they framed it, and even which podcasts are covering it. If there's another topic you're tracking, whether that be cartels, border security, corruption, you can plug it right into the search bar and see the full spread of coverage. Subscribe to get 40% off of the Vantage plan by going directly to groundnews.com/ironclad or by clicking my link in the description. With their bias checker, you can see exactly where a news outlet leans, and with their blind spot feed, you can catch up on stories that may be underreported and that you may have missed. This organizes all of the coverage into one place so you can grasp the full story. It's not about telling you what to think. It's about helping you think critically with context. Due to the way that the Fiscalia works, the way the justice system works in Mexico does a very solid job for the most part at protecting the identities of these victims. However, it also can take away a lot of details that can allow us to connect these women to this CJNG murder, baby theft operation that's going on. Another woman was found strangled to death in El Granjero neighborhood. 2 men were arrested in this, and it's also unclear whether she was pregnant or not. What I want you guys to keep in mind is that based on the information that I received from law enforcement, the people who are running this operation likely have a certified OBGYN performing the removal of the baby. It seems to be a very butchered cesarean section, the way they're getting these babies out. And the only priority here is to ensure that the baby stays alive. The mother of the child is then either left for dead or dies in the process. So far it seems as though none of these women are surviving this or even being allowed to survive this. But the babies, of course, are, because this is what they are profiting off of. They're profiting off of the babies. Another question I had that there's still no answers to, and I'm sure a lot of you guys are asking, who are the buyers? And I know, and this will probably spark some speculation, because when I first heard about this, my first thought was, is this human trafficking? Is this illegal adoption? Who is the demographic of people purchasing these babies? And how are they getting into contact with the very people selling the babies and crossing them into the United States? It seems as though the people running this operation are somehow putting together paperwork to be able to cross these babies, but they also could just be crossing them through the illegal, unprotected, unmonitored border crossings. Right now, it seems as though the priority for the investigation and the Mexican law enforcement sources that I've spoken to is to dismantle the ring as a whole. But of course, the demand for these babies is mind-blowing. Of course, also, there may be some people who are purchasing these babies and unaware of the circumstances that they are getting these babies from. Like I said, with the bare bones details that I have, I thought it would be important to get this story out there, break this news. But so far, it really is bare bones, and I have a lot of questions, as I'm sure a lot of you do. Now, just this week on Tuesday, a woman's body was found in a very advanced state of decomposition in the Jardines de Roma neighborhood. This neighborhood is right next to where Leslie was killed or was found, and she was pregnant. Now, this woman whose body was found this week, we have absolutely no details on who she is, whether she was pregnant or her age. It seems as though a lot of the women who are falling victim to this are very young. They're younger than me. They're like 20 years old. And they're essentially at full term with their pregnancy. And a question that I had, and, it may sound jaded, but was, were these women doing this for money? Especially considering that I was told that they're coming from low socioeconomic backgrounds. And if they were opting to sell their babies, that is not the case. This is a forced birth and kidnapping of the babies. I can't even believe I'm saying this. Something I think is worth mentioning is that this, of course, is a result of what we've seen in terms of the southern border crackdown. When revenue drops for human smuggling, drug smuggling, anything that was very lucrative for these organized crime groups at the southern border, they turn to different means. And unfortunately, in this case, those means have become some of the most tragic cases that I have ever witnessed in my career. This is deplorable. And what complicates matters even more is Juarez's missing and murdered women problem that has existed for so long, now honing in to try and find which of these women who are missing were pregnant and possibly victims of this crime ring that is taking their babies and allegedly operating with or for the CJNG. This makes it all that much more complicated, but also reduces the possibility of justice. Keep in mind, if these women, which most of them are, I think they actually all are from poor households, the odds that their families will be able to fully lock in and advocate for them and push for justice are just low. I mean, we've seen cases of families who have the means to push for justice for their daughters, for their mothers, their sisters, their wives, and yet nothing comes of it. Typically, in these cases, the only way to bring justice or to get the adequate information is public outrage. Unfortunately, like I said, typically this demographic of women doesn't spark public outrage. It certainly outrages me, and this is why I became a journalist in the first place, to cover these kinds of stories and to bring these stories to light, because there is no way in our world that shit like this should ever be happening, let alone people turning a blind eye to it or not even knowing about it in the first place. At this rate, with the amount of women who have allegedly had to endure this kidnapping, murder, and theft of their babies, this should be declared a national emergency, a crisis. It is one of the worst possible things that could happen in society. And fortunately, we now know about it. Of course, I wish this was not happening, but at the very least, we can all stay informed and understand that this is going on. This is what happens when organized crime groups have to shift focus to find a way to make revenue in a different way. This is what happens when people on the other side of the border in the US are complicit in funding organized crime. Because if Americans in El Paso, in Texas, are the ones purchasing these babies, the cartels are profiting off of American money, with American money. As the story continues to develop and I continue to gather as much information as possible, I will be sure to bring all of it to light, no matter the implications. Because these are voiceless victims who deserve to feel safe. Stories like this are the reason why we need to stay critical and tuned into what's going on, because these women are absolutely helpless. And we have no idea where these babies are ending up. I want to give thanks to a lot of the help and reporting and digging that Stefano at All Source News did and Carlos at B&O News. We are all making sure that we stay on top of this story and that hopefully, even if it's just a morsel, that these women and their babies can receive some level of justice. Thank you guys so much for tuning in to this episode of Borderland Dispatches, an Ironclad original with Katarina Schultz.